The sterile air in the conference room bites at my skin. It smells of stale coffee and ambition. Outside the window, the city gleams, cold and indifferent. Below, maybe 20 floors down, a moving truck idles at the curb. A small, absurdly expensive antique table is being carried out, wrapped in blankets like a precious, wounded animal. I watch it descend, a lump forming in my throat, not from sadness, but something hard and sharp, like swallowed glass. My fingers trace the polished wood of the conference table. Minutes ago, I signed the final papers. Millions of dollars changing hands. A massive corporate acquisition. Downstairs, an eviction is happening. They are connected, irrevocably linked by betrayal and carefully orchestrated consequence. The antique table disappears into the truck. It feels less like furniture being moved and more like a piece of someone's stolen life being carted away. My chest is tight. This isn't joy. It's something far colder, far more complicated. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. My life wasn't always measured in conference room sterility and the cold satisfaction of watching someone else's possessions leave a building. It used to be normal, or what I thought was normal. Weekdays bled into weekends, marked by the predictable rhythm of work, shared dinners, quiet evenings on the couch. My career demanded long hours, built my company from a scrappy startup into a significant player, but I always carved out time. For him. For us. Our apartment was high up, a different building, one we'd bought together years ago. Filled with books and art we'd chosen, a history etched into the walls. He was supportive, or seemed to be, celebrated my successes, held my hand when deals fell through. We had a comfortable life, built brick by careful brick. He worked too, in finance, a world I understood from a distance, full of numbers and deals that seemed less tangible than the real estate I dealt in. We talked about futures, about maybe slowing down eventually, finding a place by the water. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was solid. It felt real. It felt safe. The first crack wasn't a dramatic fissure, just a hairline fracture I barely noticed. Little things. Late nights at the office that became more frequent, less explained. A new phone he was suddenly very protective of. A shift in his gaze, subtle, hard to pin down, like he was looking through me or past me to something else. I dismissed it. Stress from work, I told myself. Everyone gets distant sometimes. My own focus was intense. A major acquisition was on the horizon, demanding every ounce of my attention. Long hours, late nights, the constant hum of strategy sessions and due diligence reports filled my head. Maybe I was distracted. Maybe I missed the storm gathering on the horizon because I was too busy navigating choppy waters in the boardroom. The irony is a bitter taste in my mouth now. I was so focused on building empires, I didn't see mine crumbling right beside me. The inciting incident wasn't a dramatic confession or a walked-in-on scene. It was colder, sharper. A document. An email chain accidentally left open on his laptop one morning. My eyes caught a name I didn't recognize, then an address. An address in a building I knew. A luxury building. My curiosity, a professional instinct honed by years in real estate, piqued. I clicked. It wasn't work-related. Not his work, anyway. It was a contract. A purchase agreement. For a penthouse unit. In that building. Address matched. The buyer's name wasn't his. It was hers. The name from the email thread. And the funds? Traced back, through a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations, complex enough to fool anyone not intimately familiar with financial forensics. Or the personal finances of the man I slept beside every night. $3 million. For her. A penthouse. In cash. The air left the room. My lungs seized. $3 million. A sum that represented not just wealth, but a deliberate, calculated decision to build a life, a space, for another woman. It wasn't a cheap motel room, a fleeting mistake. This was an investment. A declaration. The details blurred, the legal jargon, the bank names, they washed over me as the single, devastating truth settled deep in my bones. He hadn't just cheated. He had built her a palace. With our money. The money I helped earn, I helped save, I helped invest. The solid ground beneath me dissolved. I felt myself falling into an abyss of betrayal. My vision tunneled. The room spun. The laptop screen, filled with its damning text, seemed to pulse with a malignant light. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a second life, meticulously constructed, hidden in plain sight, a monument to his deceit. The initial aftermath was a blur of raw, unadulterated pain. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was a complete dismantling of reality. Every shared memory, every kiss, every whispered future became tainted. Lies. All lies. I moved through the days like a ghost in my own life. The apartment, our apartment, felt foreign, hostile. The furniture, the art, suddenly seemed like props in a play where I was the naive fool. Sleep offered no escape, only nightmares filled with phantom penthouses and whispering names. Eating was impossible. My stomach twisted itself into knots. I went to work, went through the motions, but my mind was a constant loop of the email, the address, the horrifying sum. $3 million. I wanted to confront him, to scream, to shatter things, to demand answers. But the shock was paralyzing. My voice felt trapped in my throat. What words could even encompass this level of betrayal? He acted normal. Too normal. Humming in the kitchen, asking about my day, touching my arm with the same hand that had signed the papers for her. His normalcy felt like a second layer of deceit, a cruel mockery. The disconnect was unbearable. I watched him, this stranger in my home, and felt a cold, terrifying emptiness open inside me. My early struggles weren't about how to leave, but how to breathe, how to function when the foundation of my world had been dynamited. I couldn't see a path forward, only rubble. The pain was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I existed in a state of stunned silence, the screams trapped behind locked doors in my mind. As the initial shock began to subside, replaced by a simmering, corrosive anger, the practical problems started to surface. What about the money? How much of our shared assets had he siphoned off for this project? The complexity of the transaction he'd set up spoke volumes about his intent. Not a fling, but a long-term commitment, carefully hidden. He had used shell corporations, layered transfers. Unwinding it, tracking the extent of the financial damage, felt overwhelming. I started digging, quietly at first, late at night after he was asleep. His financial records, his emails, his texts. Each discovery was a fresh wound. More names, more dates, more lies. The mistress wasn't some fleeting figure. She was woven into the fabric of his life in ways I hadn't comprehended. Dinners, weekends away, holidays. All while he maintained the facade of our life. My attempts to even hint at my knowledge were met with immediate, aggressive denial. If I asked about a late night, he'd snap. If I questioned a financial statement, he'd become defensive, accusing me of not trusting him, of being stressed by work. His gaslighting was masterful, turning my pain and suspicion back on me, making me doubt my own sanity. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was a psychological war. He was actively trying to make me feel crazy, unstable, presumably to protect his secret life, his assets, his control. The emotional toll escalated daily. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My focus at work suffered, which terrified me. My company was everything I had built, my identity outside of the crumbling marriage. The thought of losing that too, because of his actions, was unacceptable. Friends noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to confess the sordid reality. How do you tell people the man you built a life with was meticulously building another life, a better life, for someone else with your shared resources? The shame was crushing. I felt isolated, trapped in a cage of his making. The penthouse, the symbol of his ultimate betrayal, loomed in my mind. I started driving past the building, a dark, glass and steel structure in a prime neighborhood. It stood there, mocking me, a monument to his deceit and my humiliation. The mistress, this woman who had stolen my life piece by piece, was living there, in a home he bought her. The injustice burned like acid. All seemed lost. My marriage was a lie, my financial security potentially compromised, my emotional state fragile, and my work suffering. I was drowning in the deepening crisis. The shift wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, hardening process, like concrete setting in my veins. The pain was still there, a constant ache, but the raw, incapacitating shock began to give way to something colder, sharper. Anger. Not the hot, messy kind that makes you lash out blindly, but a calculated, icy fury. I was done being the victim, done reeling from his lies. He had underestimated me. He had seen my success, my ambition, but he hadn't seen the steel forged in years of fighting for everything I had. He thought I would crumble, maybe leave quietly, licking my wounds while he sailed off into the sunset with his new life in the sky. He was wrong. The turning point arrived on a Tuesday, during a strategy meeting about potential acquisitions. We were reviewing a list of properties, buildings that fit our portfolio strategy. And there it was. The address. The building where his mistress resided. It was on the list, a potential target. Not because of me. The team had identified it weeks ago based on market analysis, location, and potential value. It was a prime asset. A cold, strategic thought bloomed in the sterile air of the conference room. An idea so audacious, so perfectly aligned with both my professional capabilities and my personal vendetta, it felt like a surge of electricity. My colleagues presented the data, the financials, the pros and cons. I listened, contributing professionally, asking the right questions, my face a mask of neutral interest. Inside, a storm was raging, but it was a controlled storm, one I was directing. The building wasn't just a potential acquisition anymore. It was a weapon.
A tool.
My turning point was the decision to pivot. To stop reacting emotionally and start acting strategically. To leverage my position, my company's resources, my knowledge of the market, to hit him where it hurt the most, using the very symbol of his betrayal against him. It wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about reclaiming my power, about showing him the true cost of underestimating the woman he married. The decision was cold, deliberate, and absolute. I would acquire the building. And in doing so, I would dismantle the luxurious life he had built for her, piece by careful piece. The path to acquiring the building was complex, demanding, and required absolute focus. It wasn't a quick process. Months passed, filled with late-night calls, tense negotiations, meticulous due diligence. I threw myself into the work. It was a distraction from the emotional turmoil, yes, but more importantly, it was the engine of my plan. I became intimately familiar with the building's financials, its tenants, its quirks. Every detail was important. I worked with my legal team, my finance team, pushing the deal forward. They saw a smart, aggressive CEO pursuing a valuable asset. They had no idea the personal war being waged beneath the surface. Maintaining the facade at home was perhaps the hardest part. I continued living under the same roof as the man who had betrayed me so profoundly. I learned to compartmentalize, to bury the rage and pain deep down while I executed my plan. He remained oblivious, comfortable in his lies, occasionally making veiled comments about my increased focus on work, never suspecting the true target of my ambition. The mistress remained a phantom presence, occasionally glimpsed in his phone, a constant reminder of what I was fighting against. The deepening crisis wasn't just the initial pain, it was the sustained effort of living a double life myself, the grieving wife and the ruthless CEO, moving pieces on a chessboard he didn't even know he was playing on. The stress was immense, a physical weight on my shoulders, but the cold determination fueled me. Every sleepless night, every forced smile, every lie I had to tell to protect my plan, sharpened my resolve. I felt like a coiled spring, the tension building with every passing day, waiting for the moment to unleash the full force of my retaliation. All the threads, the betrayal, the money, the building, the mistress, were weaving together into a single, unavoidable collision. The day of the climax arrived with a deceptive calm. Outside, the sky was a pale, indifferent blue. Inside the conference room, the air crackled with nervous energy. Years of work, months of intense negotiation, culminated in this moment. The table was massive, polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the anxious faces of the lawyers and executives gathered. The closing documents, stacks of them, sat between us, waiting for the final signatures. My pen felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't just a transaction. It was the culmination of my vengeance, wrapped in the respectable guise of corporate growth. We went through the final checks, the ritualistic exchange of paper and confirmations. My focus was absolute. My team was efficient, professional. On the other side of the table, the seller's representatives looked relieved, eager to finalize the massive deal. The only one in the room whose heart was pounding with a rhythm entirely separate from the beat of business was me. Every clause, every number, felt charged with personal significance. The building wasn't just property, it was the cage he had built for her. And I was about to become the warden. As the final documents were signed, witnessed, and exchanged, a wave of cold satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not yet. More like the quiet click of a lock falling into place. Simultaneously, across town, other parts of my plan were unfolding. I had timed this meticulously. The eviction notice for Unit 20B, the penthouse unit he had bought for her, had been served weeks ago, citing violations of building rules I had carefully unearthed during due diligence, minor things, ignored by the previous owners, strictly enforced by the new ones. The final deadline was today. This morning. My phone vibrated subtly on the table beside me. A prearranged signal. A single text message. It simply said, confirmed the moving truck outside, the antique table I watched descend. That was her. Being evicted from the palace he built her, on the very day I became the owner of the entire kingdom. The plot twist wasn't me exposing him publicly or engaging in a messy confrontation. It was far more clinical, far more devastating. He was blindsided because he never saw me as a strategic threat outside of the boardroom. He thought my power was confined to my company, separate from my personal life. He never imagined I would use the resources, the network, the sheer corporate might I had built, to dismantle his private world. He thought he was safe in his deceit, protected by layers of financial complexity and my presumed emotional fragility. He hadn't just underestimated my intelligence, he had underestimated my capacity for cold, calculated retaliation. He bought her a penthouse to hide his affair. I bought the entire building to expose it and destroy its foundation. I looked at the signature on the final document. Mine. Powerful. Definitive. He was somewhere else, likely oblivious, going about his day. His mistress was being removed from the gilded cage he'd built, likely calling him in a panic. He would discover not just that she was evicted, but why. Because the building had a new owner. Me. The irony was a perfectly chilled cocktail of bitter and sweet. He built a monument to his betrayal. I tore it down with the stroke of a pen. He was completely blindsided. The victim didn't just survive. She became the architect of his downfall, using the very instruments of her own success. The aftermath was not a scene of emotional reckoning with him. That felt unnecessary now. Small. My victory wasn't about him anymore. Not entirely. It was about reclaiming my agency, my power. The marriage, of course, was over. A dead thing, left where it lay. There was no yelling, no dramatic breakup scene. Just a quiet, cold separation. He understood, finally, the scale of what I had done, the calculated precision with which I had used my professional life to erase a part of his personal one. His shock was palpable, his attempts at justification or anger hollow. He saw the wall I had built, made of steel and concrete and signed documents, and he knew he couldn't break through it. The penthouse was gone, the mistress was gone, and the illusion of his perfect, hidden life had evaporated. There wasn't triumphant joy, not really. A quiet, profound sense of finality. The hollow space the betrayal had created inside me was still there, perhaps always would be, but it was no longer filled with pain and confusion. It was filled with a cold, clear understanding of human nature, of his nature and of my own strength. I had taken the worst thing he could do to me and turned it into a demonstration of my own power. It was a strange, bitter kind of satisfaction. The building stood, a symbol of my company's success and a monument to my own resilience and strategic vindication. Life wasn't normal again. Not the old normal. It was a new normal, sharper, colder, built on the ruins of the old, but undeniably mine. The pain was a scar now, a reminder, but not a wound that bled. I had survived the storm, and I had used the lightning to forge a new path. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.